Yes. Now we're in ninth grade lit. We're talking about for the first time Inferno, and we had a good answer. Emily said you have the different layers or different circles of hell. Yes. Dante divides hell into 9 circles. And it's funny how it works. It's very mathematical. There are 2 sections of hell. There are 3 sections of hell. There are 9 sections of hell. There are 24 sections of hell. So it has this place called hell that's subdivided into various ways. You can divide it in half. You can divide it into 3 parts, or you can divide it into 9 parts. I think it's one of the few books you'll ever read, guys, that surely they made a video game of this. It's got layers. It's got levels. You know, I mean, isn't that what video games are all about, going from one level to the next? Except this one, you're going down instead of up. But it's almost like the perfect game or the perfect book to make a video game. And of course, it has been done. It has been made. Let me ask you this. What do you know about hell? I think we've had this discussion too. We're sort of anticipating it. What do you know about hell? It's hot. Dante's hell is not, interestingly enough, not at the core of hell. You'll find out it's frozen solid. So it's an interesting way to describe hell. But most people think it's hot, yeah. Where is it? What do you mean it's hot? Where did the heat come from? I mean, those are just good questions I have. And Jesus even called it hot because he said there's this place outside of the city of Jerusalem. They burn their trash, Gehenna, and that's actually the word I guess that's a Greek word. I don't know what that is, but it's the word we get hell from. And there's certainly a good reason to think that in some ways it's hot. Anything else you want to know about hell? Well, Dante's not probably the place to go. You need to go to scriptures, and we will do that. We'll have a couple of days. We'll look at what scripture says about hell and what it says about heaven. By the way, what do you think about heaven? You ever think about heaven? You ever thought what it was going to be like? Well, you're going to spend eternity there. You know, we're all hoping, if you believe in Jesus Christ, you will. If you don't, then that's another issue. But if you're going to spend eternity, wouldn't you want to kind of know what's that going to be like? And the Bible doesn't tell us. It's probably enough to satisfy us. It is a lot. It doesn't tell us about heaven. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know if I've read this, that there's actually more in the Bible about hell than heaven. I don't know if that's true, but it wouldn't surprise me. Jesus talked more about hell, probably both, than anybody in the Bible. But these are questions that we're going to ask as we look at this. What's hell like? How do you get there? Why would anybody want to go there? What's heaven like? Well, anyway, here we go. As usual, we're going to start off with questions. And I think these questions are great to study when the time comes. So I'm going to suggest you do that. You don't want to see this. You might want to see it, but I can't let you see it. It's my grade book. There will be a study guide. I'm not going to give that to you. I haven't run it off yet either, but it's a little longer than what we've been using. It looks similar, but it's just a little bit longer, as you can imagine. All right, so again, write these down because they'll be a great place to study. You can bet these questions are going to be on a test that we have sometime. You're going to learn where Dante was born. And I'm going to tell you in just a minute, but do you know where he was born, like generally speaking? Like, what country? Well, I don't know that. That's probably a good guess. But do you know what country he's in? Italy. So if you ever go to Italy, if we go to Italy as a class, or you will go to the town he was born in, and you'll see the town where he was buried. They're not the same place. And he has a full name. He's one of those people like Elvis, and that only goes by one name, Beyonce. Can you believe I put Elvis, Beyonce, and Dante in the same category? You know, those celebrities that have just one name. That's when you know you've made it. Beatrice. You really need to know her first name. I know Ms. Roberts has her youngest daughter is named Beatrice. I'm not sure I know where that name is, if it's a family name, but Beatrice is a girl who had a great influence on Dante. And Dante is a Renaissance man, so we need to review that. We talked about it with the Squire and Canterbury Tales. He is another example of a Renaissance man. Yes.
Wait, who is she again?
I hadn't told you. She's a girl. We'll find out in just a minute. It's fascinating. You will be interested in it, I promise you. Why was Dante exiled from Florence? Well, I gave that away. Florence is his hometown, where he lived most of his life. But he was exiled for reasons that we'll find out later. In Italy at the time, you'll learn that there are two big major political parties called the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. The Guelph party subdivided into two political parties called the blacks and the whites. Believe it or not, it has nothing to do with race. The whites were the name of one of the family members that the party was in the party. Her name was Blanca, I can't remember, Blanche, we would say in English, which means white. So the opposing party, since they call themselves the white party, we'll call ourselves the black party. And those were two sub-parties of the Guelph party. We're talking about political parties. And we have some more questions on the other side. And these are basically background questions. I think you're going to find that, at least I feel this way, Inferno is a wonderfully complicated book. It's like, yeah, it's complicated, but that's why you like it. It's got all these intricate things and details that make it really interesting. There's nothing boring about hell. Although, you remember who said that it was boring? Remember Murden Cathedral? The chorus said that's what hell would be like. It would be all alone and you just stare at yourself all the time. That would be boring if all you had is yourself. But that would also be hell, because we were made for other people, to interact with other people. All right, can I go on? All right, they're about maybe the same number. I think dates are important. They help you frame things. It matters what came before what. That matters. Order, chronological order does matter. And so I think we need to know when he was born, when he died. We knew that about Shakespeare. We knew when Henry V was published. We're talking about the 1500s. We're actually going back. We're kind of out of order. Henry V was a couple hundred years after Divine Comedy. So we're kind of stepping back into history here. There are 3 parts to the Divine Comedy. The whole series is called the Divine Comedy, and Inferno is the first of part of that. It's not they're not sequels to each other. They're all part of the same book, in a sense, published in 3 different books. There's one big book published in 3 different sections. That's kind of how you should look at it. Inferno, by the way, you know what Inferno means? I'm sorry?
Never mind.
Well, you know, we would say hell, so it is another word for that. I'm gonna just see how else we might give it. You're gonna read about hell next year. You're gonna read Milton's Paradise Lost, at least sections of it, and a major character in Paradise Lost is Satan. You see one glimpse of Satan here, but in Paradise Lost, he's a living, breathing, vital part of that book. And the first chapter opens in hell, after he and his buddies have been thrown out of heaven. This is our story. That's why I love these. If you're a believer, this is your story. It's a human version of it, like Paradise Lost. But they're talking about things that are part of who we are. And that's why I get excited about it, because it's your identity. We are Christians. We're going to heaven. We're trying to save people from going to hell. Christ did that. This is Holy Week. Tonight, Jesus, the communion. You see how it all comes together? Religion, your life, literature. That's why we're in classical school, because that's what we do here. We show you everything is connected in some way. But this, I get excited about it because I've got some personal interest, as you ought to, in it. Inferno, I'm still looking up Inferno. So how else could you use? Ineffective, inebriate, Inferno. A place or the state that resembles a jest tale. So, yeah, there was a famous, it was a popular movie back in the 80s called Towering Inferno. It was about this big, tall building that was burning, and the whole movie was about the rescue of it. But, so Inferno can mean loosely something hell-like, like fire. If you haven't noticed it, there are 3 parts to Inferno. There are 9 sections of hell. He loves the number 3, and it's multiples. Isn't that what you call it? Like the word 24. Is that a multiple? Would you call that a multiple of the number 3? That's you see it there. You see the number 3 matters. Why do you think it matters to him? Why didn't he pick 2? How about 6?
Well, there's 3 divisions of hell.
Well, yeah, that's true. How else? Maybe like even above that or before that. Like we're Christians. You think of like
Son, God, Holy Spirit.
yeah. What do we call that? The Trinity, the Triune God, or the Trinity. So it's a perfect number. I was reading recently that 3. We know how important 3 is. I don't know why 4 is sacred, but for ancients, the number 3 and the number 4 are all sacred. And if you put those together, what number do you get?
7.
And even in our culture, that's the lucky number, right? That's everybody's lucky. We were married on the 17th, not because of that, but 17th of July. My son, one of them, was married on the 7th day of the 7th month of 2007. And a lot of people wanted to get married on that day because of that, 777. How would you like to be married on the 6th day of the 6th month in 2006? And it would be 666. That's also a biblical number, but not a positive one, yeah.
I was gonna ask, why is 666 so bad?
Nobody's completely sure of that. is why, because it's in the book of Revelation that the name of the beast, there's a beast, there's a unholy trinity in the Bible too. The Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. The unholy trinity is Satan, the Antichrist, and this other figure, and I forget how the Bible refers to him, and he's like a religious figure. That the beast is given the number 666. It says because that's the number of a man, and some people say it's because it's one less than 7. You know what I mean? That's the story of man, right? 7 is perfect. We're not, and so anything that's 6 is. I mean, that's just one way to look at it. Other people, they probably have other better, but I have heard that one. And what are the divisions of hell is found in Inferno? It'd be my goal that you could actually write down, like on a blank sheet of paper, from 1 to 24, what each section of hell is. And you really can. I don't know if I'll ever ask it that way. I'll ask similar questions. Because I think that's part of what this book is about. All right, Dante, there's his last name. Make sure you get this. Dante's last name is Alighieri, or however you would say it in Italian. 1265 in Florence, Italy. So Shakespeare was born almost 300 years later, 1564. His family were Guelphs, the political party. They were not of great nobility. They weren't commoners, and I don't know much about Italy and how, we know a lot about England, classes, the lords, we know that's so much a part of Henry V. So I don't know exactly who the nobles were, but he wasn't one of the great nobles. He was orphaned at age 12, and they were raised by a stepmother. So, he didn't have the perfect childhood. And then, when he was 9 years old, he met this 8-year-old girl named Beatrice. And later he said of Beatrice, she was the most important enduring influence upon his life and genius. 8-year-old girl. We'll learn more about Beatrice in a minute. But it was love at first sight. Now, 8-year-old, I have a grandson who's in the 2nd grade. 9-year-olds are typically in the 3rd grade. So,
My brother's third
so he's 9. Is he 9?
grade. Yeah.
All right. Well, can you imagine meeting somebody when you're in the 2nd grade that is the love of your life? I think that's very unusual, but that's what happened. And he barely ever knew her. He never married her. They did grow up, and I'm not going to be able to tell you a lot more about her. There is a little more you need to know. The fact is, though, that the influence is real. The explanation is, I don't know, we can't explain it, but she inspired him for the rest. She is a major character, or you would meet her you meet her in Inferno. You actually do meet her, Beatrice. Then you meet her again in Purgatory, and she is Dante's guide to heaven. So she is very much a part of the story. Not the 8-year-old Beatrice, but the grown woman Beatrice. I think that'd be, I don't know what the word Beatrice means, like I've never looked. You ever known a Beatrice?
No. Shoot, actually.
I think I never thought about the name, but after learning about this book and about him, I think that would be a pretty name. It has certainly a literary history. So, Dante Alighieri, you remember his last name? If I should ask that. All right, let's talk about Beatrice. There's not a lot here. I mean, I know about as much as I need to know to teach you. But there's not much more to know. And here's what we know. It's not so much who the girl was, it's what he thought she was, or what he allowed her to be in his life. And he said that meeting her, the first time he met her, I think he met her on the street, Dante and maybe his father or mother, I don't know, he was orphaned, so I don't know when it was. I think they were still alive. But anyway, he met her on the street first time. And she was with some adult, and he met her. And he said that experience, his heart trembled, and said, now, I'm sure he didn't think of it at the time. I can't imagine an 8-year-old, 9-year-old being able to articulate this. But he said, behold, a God stronger than I is come to rule over me. So, like, she was like this goddess, 8 years old, 2nd grade. He described her as something divine walking the earth bodily. That's sort of a famous statement. I hope you're copying them all down, but I think that's interesting. Something divine walking the earth bodily. Who is the only person in history who actually meets that description? Jesus. He was divine, not something divine. The divine, the Son of the Father, one of the Trinity, who walked the earth bodily. But he thought so highly of her that he described her in those terms. She actually married another man, and he married another woman, and they had children. And I think the fascinating thing is this. He was only, in the same room with her a few times in his life. Like maybe at public gatherings, like a party or something. He was only around her a handful of times. And she only lived to be 24. He lived, I think, into his 60s or 50s. And he was 25 when she died and married. And that's it. That's the story. And there may be a lot more about her. I don't think there's a whole lot more. There's not more to say. I mean, it all is in his head. Dante's head and heart created this influence. So, but as I mentioned, she's in every one of the volumes of the Divine Comedy. Yeah.
Can I get a mass?
Yeah. I mean, do I need to give you one?
Sure.
So, what eventually came of all this? Well, first of all, he wrote about her, La Vita Nuova. And let me just point out that Inferno, or Divine Comedy, is written in Italian, not Latin. It was the first great work that was written in Italian. And so all of these books that you see here that he wrote, I think these are all in Italian. So he wrote The New Life, which was a collection of verses about his love for her. This 8-year-old girl. Actually, she grew up to be 24. What she stood for in his thinking was a symbol for grace and glory, the God-bearing image in Divine Comedy. So when we see her in the first or second part, the first, second chapter, they're not chapters, we'll call them something else. But when we see her, she is in heaven, and she represents, like the perfect person that's not Christ. So she represents grace, God's grace to us, and in her beauty, God's glory. So we said earlier that one of the questions, how is he a Renaissance man? Do you remember how we define Renaissance man? Like the Squire was a Renaissance boy. Why do we call him that? Yeah, read.
He has a lot of talents.
Yes, well-rounded. Notice here what you see in Dante. He was a businessman at 18. Kind of ran a business. I don't know what it was. At 25, he's a soldier. Then he becomes a scholar. He spent 10 years studying under Bruno Latini, who, interestingly enough, we meet in hell. So in his mind, his teacher went to hell. Yes.
Was he himself like a Christian?
Yes. Yes.
How did his wife feel about him writing books on Jesus?
That's a great question. How close were they? I don't know. That's a really good question. And I think he had children too. Dante Jr. I don't know how many, if they were boys or girls. But that's three things right there. He's a businessman, he's a soldier, he's a scholar. And you'll find that he wrote first of all, he wrote love poems. We already noted that, but he wrote other things too. Love poems are like personal. But he wrote about, well, we'll see in a minute. We know he wrote about hell, heaven, so kind of a theology. I'll have to, I won't have time today much, but one of the reasons I like the book is because it shows us a different view of sin. It doesn't make it look better at all. I'm not saying that. It shows us what it looks like from a different perspective. Like we think that sometimes sins are arbitrary. Like why can't we do that? It's just an arbitrary rule. Shirt tails out. We hadn't done much with that this year because of this thing. Is it kind of arbitrary? I mean, what difference does it make? Well, it kind of looks nicer, I guess. There's always a reason. Sometimes I think we feel that about sin. That's an arbitrary thing. Why should that be a sin? Well, Dante's Inferno shows us kind of why these sins, and there are 24 of them, why these sins are bad. It's the way he looks at it. And that may not sound at all interesting to you. It ought to, because it's something you and I do very well. We're expert sinners. It's the most natural thing in the world to sin. We have to learn to do that. So the problem is having to look at those sins objectively, because they're so much a part of us. And Dante does that. I didn't think of stealing that way. I didn't think of lust that way, or I didn't think of murder that way. It actually shows us what sin looks like, and I think it becomes more real that way. All right, so more about Dante, the Renaissance man. He studied philosophy, theology, astronomy, and classical poetry. So he was into literature, religion, theology, I like that word better, and philosophy. He studied all those things. He was a great reader. I don't know if any of you ever have the desire to write. I've always loved stories, and I became a teacher, so I guess somewhere in me I've always wanted to be a writer, and I've admired writers. It's hard to do. I've written before, you've written a lot, but you're never going to be a good writer unless you're a reader. He could draw, sing, and write poetry. He was like, again, that sounds a lot like the Squire, doesn't it? Now, when I say he was born 1264, is that when he was born? So he was 34 when he got married. I was 28 when I got married. And his marriage was arranged. But apparently, I said he was 34. She had died when he was 25. So she had been dead almost 10 years. That is Beatrice. So she wasn't available. She was already married. And yes, they had 4 children. I don't know anything about them. Any of you remember a few years ago this movie came out? I think it was Tom Hanks, called Inferno. And it wasn't about Dante's Inferno, but only as a god. There was some murderer or some guy in it, and you had to know Dante's Inferno to solve the crime. So that's why it was called Inferno. If this inspires you to take a book home, ask me, and I'd be happy to give it to you. I just thought it was kind of pointless to give it if you would not want it or do anything with it, and you're not required to. So on your way out, if you're interested, I can get you a copy. The same person translated that is translated Song of Roland. Dorothy Sayers, the classical lady. We've talked about her before. And Inferno is the kind of thing that you have to read it with footnotes. It's almost impossible to enjoy or to understand. And you say, well, that doesn't sound like a lot of fun. It's like reading 2 things at once. Well, yeah. But once you get, gosh, what does this mean? I want to know what this means. You go to the footnote. Oh, yeah, okay, that makes sense. But there are tons of footnotes. They're actually at the end of each chapter that are very helpful. And she wrote those. I think we have time for one more. All right, here's another part of this Renaissance man. He goes into politics. Can you imagine? I entered Florence politics around 1295. Now, you have to understand that, and we'll probably have to end on this slide, but Italian politics, they didn't have a unified country. It was really a collection of city-states. Like you think of Greece, the Golden Age, well, I guess it's called the Golden Age. But anyway, you've got Sparta, you've got Athens. It was a group of cities, so each city kind of was a separate entity. And so you had cities fighting each other, like little countries, because that's kind of what it was. So the priorate was the ruling body of Florence, and he was actually a part of that. So he reached the highest level of politics in Florence. Florence was a Guelph city. Dante was a Guelph. And the 2 political parties at the time were called the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. And I'm going to give you before we leave, a brief summary of what the difference is. So the Guelphs, if I had a marker, I'm not going to be able to do that. But the Guelphs were democratic instead of autocratic. You know, autocratic means you got one ruler, dictator, emperor, king. Instead of the people ran a democracy like our country, which we hope to preserve. But Guelphs were democratic as opposed to having an emperor or a king, and mostly middle class. I don't know what you consider yourself, but most people today are middle class because that's where most people are. They're in the middle. They're not poor. They're not super wealthy. So he would be one of us. And they opposed the power of the emperor, the Holy Roman Emperor, and supported the Pope. So there are about four things. We still got a minute, so let's at least write this next one. And the Ghibellines were the opposite of that. The Ghibellines were aristocratic, the upper crust, the super wealthy, supported the emperor and opposed the Pope. So the Guelphs, democratic, supported the Pope, middle class. Ghibellines, aristocratic, supported the emperor. Aristocratic, supported the emperor and opposed the Pope. So, welcome to the world of Dante. I'll be surprised if you don't find it interesting. My regret is always we can't read more. But we'll read as much as we can, probably up to half the Inferno, and you'll get a pretty good idea of what it's like. So I hope you have a great spring break. Yeah, we'll see ya. If you want a book, right over there.
Thank you.
Yeah, see you later.